Hello, Blake Rudis here with EverydayHDR.com and HDRinsider.com, and today I want to talk to you about how you can use the warp tool to correct extreme wide-angle lens distortion. Now, this is a 17 to 40 millimeter lens that was used to take this photograph, and you can see that the barn right here is quite lopsided, and in real life it wasn't that lopsided. It's just when you have that extreme wide-angle lens and you get things towards the edge of that lens, things start to bend and warp in ways that don't really look that great. So we can fix that with the filter lens correction, and it has already picked out the lens for me that it's got described here, the Canon EF 17 to 40 millimeter lens. It's exactly the one I used. It wasn't on a 1D Mark III, but it was on a 60, which they have pretty much similar sensors. So I'm not too worried about what it selected for the lens profile, but I don't like that it did my filter, my vignette correction there, so I'm going to undo that. And when I look at what it's done here, sure, let's look at the preview, the before and after. It has done a decent job of correcting it to what its degree of correction would be, but I don't like the fact that it kind of flattened out my landscape. It took away that wide open effect that a wide angle lens is supposed to give, and it also bloated out my barn over here on the right side and did not fix the vertical that this was at, the diagonal that this barn was at, instead of the vertical that it should be. So I'm going to press cancel because lens correction didn't work, and that's where the need for this comes in. So there's two ways you can do it. The first way, we're just going to do it right on top of the original image. So I just went ahead and duplicated our original photograph by pressing Command or Control J, and that will duplicate our layer. Now what I want to do is go to Edit, Transform, and Warp. And before I do that, let me go ahead and make some guides for myself. So I'm going to go ahead and click in the rulers. If you don't have your rulers on, you press Command or Control R, and that will turn your rulers on, and you can grab a guide and bring it over. And I'm just going to bring it over to try and show what a straight line would be on these vertical lines, and then what a straight horizontal line would be to make sure that I don't over distort this. Okay. Now I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, Warp. It's a good thing to put those guides there. You don't need to if you don't want to, but I don't feel comfortable doing this without them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the middle of this picture right here. You can even grab right on the inside of the picture somewhere and just pull it until it hits one of those guides. Now the whole time I'm doing this, I'm trying to be cautious not to make sure, or to make sure it doesn't destroy my horizontal lines at the same time. So it looks like we still, with this guide, might need to pull this part of the image this way. So it's a push and pull kind of thing here to make this barn. It's a slow process. You don't want to do too fast to make this barn seamlessly turn into what we wanted it to. Now the glory of this is that it doesn't really warp the image too much. So if I press OK, it doesn't warp the rest of the image too much, like we saw. Command or Control H will get rid of your guides, like we saw in the lens correction tool. You can see like everything's just kind of shifting from the left to the right, and that's one way you can do it. And I like doing it that way because with this image I can do it that way. But if it was a cityscape, I might need to do something else, and that's what I'm going to show you next. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this layer. So this is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on the barn, and I'm going to click on my quick selection tool, and I'm just going to make a rugged selection of this barn. It doesn't have to be anything perfect because I'm going to show you how I fix that later. Okay? So now I'm going to press Command or Control J, and that's going to duplicate just the barn. So I can take the eyeball off, and now I have just the barn. If I press Command or Control H, my guides will come back, and now I can open up the Warp tool, go to Edit, Transform, and Warp, and now all I'm doing is warping just the barn, and I'm not affecting what's going on in the picture. I don't like that move I just made there, so I will just move this out. You can also perspective warp this at this time too, but this way you get to kind of play with your barn image here, and you can warp it any which way you want. You can make for some really cool looking effects too if you pull that out. Oh, look at that. Some real crazy barn action. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and do that again. Go to Edit, Transform, and go to Warp. And just kind of warp this barn until it looks like it Looks good. I was just messing around the first time. Gotta have fun sometimes, right? Okay. So now if I press Command or Control H, I have just the barn selected, but you can see some of the barn is still in the background of this. And that's not that big of a deal. What you can do is you can just press Command or Control T and just make the barn just slightly bigger to cover up any of the stuff that was behind it. And then what you can also do is if the ground is not matching up very well, you can go ahead and put a mask on there, press B for the brush tool, make sure that black is selected, and just brush out anything that may have been warped with it that you didn't want warped. And one of the beautiful things about duplicating that, I got a lot of dust on my sensor there, one of the beautiful things about selecting it by itself individually is that you can make it larger, you can make it smaller, but if you see here, see that line that you get, it's like a sprite is what they call it, where like the contrast of the background to the foreground made for some really tricky spots for the HDR photography, or the HDR process I should say. If you segregate that barn just by itself and duplicate it, you don't get that line. You see the difference there? You don't get that white hazy line. So either way, it works out really well for any cityscapes or any buildings that you use with a 17 to 40 millimeter lens, or pretty much any wide angle lens for that matter. You got a fisheye lens. This way, you're not actually distorting the image itself, just the object that was distorted by the lens. So you still get that wide open feel with this open landscape, this swooping open landscape that you get from that wide angle lens. Again, my name is Blake Rudis with EverydayHDR.com, and if you like these tutorials and you want to see full-length workflow tutorials, I highly suggest you join HDRinsider.com, as I do a full workflow tutorial. Some of them get up to about almost an hour long a piece, so it's actually a really good time to learn not just about HDR photography, but actually just to learn Photoshop a little bit better. So have a great weekend, and if you have a wide-angle lens, go ahead and try some of this to fix that distortion.